In a game like Baldur's Gate 3, where you'll encounter enemies of all shapes and sizes, it's difficult to imagine playing a character that focuses heavily on unarmed melee attacks. But the monk is one of the classes where the rule of cool kicks in pretty hard. Larian knows that you want to run up there and punch that giant robot in its stupid face, and they're gonna let you. Welcome back, travelers. I'm glad to see you made it. I'm Colo, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Monk class in Baldur's Gate 3. We'll be looking at the skills and abilities that the class gets as you level up, as well as taking a deep individual look at each one of the class's subclasses. That way you know which route you want to take your character, and we'll sprinkle in a little bit of class lore for good measure. A big chunk of the images and information that I'm using to make this video are from the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki at bg3.wiki. I'm going to leave a link in the description of this video. Definitely check them out. They do a really good job setting up their wiki site, and I highly recommend it. Now, let's get started. First of all, what is a monk? They're a martial class that specializes in unarmed strikes, deflecting missiles out of the air, performing key-infused martial arts techniques, and some of the game's highest mobility when you compare them to the other classes. So, if that sounds awesome to you, then that's good, because it is awesome, and I highly recommend having a monk in your group. You can't go wrong. They can fill a bit of a niche role, depending on which subclass you decide to go with, but all of them have the ability to make a ton of attacks per turn and put out ridiculous damage if you build them correctly. So you'll definitely be throwing hands no matter what when you pick this class. When you're creating your monk, as always, you are absolutely able to pick whatever race, class combinations you want, even in the highest difficulty. If you just simply pick a race because of how it looks, that's not going to stop you from being able to finish the game without question at all. You'll be able to do it. However, there are a few races that have either passive abilities or built-in proficiencies that you may or may not want when you're playing a monk. So let's take a look at a few of those. One example of a bonus you might not want is shield proficiency, because all monks, regardless of which subclass you decide to go with, all monks are going to receive a ton of built-in passive bonuses that are only effective if your monk is not wearing armor or using a shield. So light armor, medium armor, heavy armor proficiency, shield proficiency, none of that matters to you, because if you were to equip one of those things, you would instantly lose like 80% of your class's buffs, and you would be way worse off under most circumstances. Now that I've said that, I'm sure somebody's going to be like, no, I have this super beefy heavy armor monk build, and cool, that's awesome. I'm glad that that exists. If it does, absolutely let me know about it, because I think that would be badass also if there's a way to pull that off. But the passives of the class are set up in such a way that your character is unarmored and not using a shield, and then you get passive bonuses that make up for those negatives along the way. All in all, what does all that rambling mean? There are certain races that you can pick that have different weapon proficiencies, different armor proficiencies, different, shield proficiency, whatever. It's not worth considering those things when you're picking your race, because you won't need armor or a shield anyway, so it doesn't matter if the character or if the race gives you that. But if the race has something else that you want, you can still benefit some other way. The shield just isn't going to do you any good. Also worth noting, at 10th level, all monks become 100% immune to poison damage and can't be poisoned or diseased at all after that point. Just a passive flat bonus. So the reason I bring that up is because green dragonborn characters get resistance to poison damage, which means you take half damage from poison damage. That bonus would become redundant because you would be resistant to a damage type that you are now immune to. And yes, you could still go green dragonborn monk and get 9 levels worth of poison resistance, and that's a perfectly viable choice. 9 levels worth of poison resistance, and then from that point forward, you are immune to it. That's pretty cool. But you could be a different kind of Dragonborn and be resistant to a different damage type for the entirety of the game, and then from 10th level on, you're also immune to poison damage. So it's just one of those things where if you want to min-max it, don't play a green Dragonborn monk. Play a different color Dragonborn. All the rest of them are perfectly fine. Or play green. Do whatever you want. I'm not your dad. Immediately after choosing the monk class, right away, you are going to be granted an absolutely ridiculous pile of bonuses and abilities. So let's look at everything one by one, see what all you get, and break this all down. First of all, it's important as a monk to pay attention to what kind of weapons you're equipping, because your character might be proficient in a weapon that does not count as a monk weapon, and you'll lose out on a ton of bonuses because of that too. So let's look into that real quick. What is a monk weapon? Any weapon that your monk is proficient with and also doesn't have the two-handed or heavy properties. And I don't even think heavy made it into the game. It was a property they went to put in the early stages of development, and they ended up not using it. Anything that's not specifically two-handed and your character's proficient with it, it's a monk weapon. Because of the martial arts deft strikes passive that you get, you can also build and play this character completely unarmed. Like, no weapons, your fists do the talking here. There are different pieces of clothing that you'll find that increase your unarmed damage, grant your unarmed attacks different elemental damage bonuses and stuff like that. Really good stuff. So you can absolutely punch your way all the way through the entire game perfectly viably. You're gonna see in this video one of my builds that was completely unarmed puts down some freaking damage. It was crazy how much damage that thing was doing. So we'll take a look at that. When attacking with a monk weapon or with an unarmed strike, you will trigger the martial arts bonus unarmed strike ability. As long as you attack with a proper weapon or with no weapon at all, you'll get to attack again by spending a bonus action. You're also going to obtain the first of your key points. This is the monk's spendable resource that you get back on short rests. Any kind of martial arts techniques that you learn, more advanced martial arts style things usually use key points. Any kind of spells that you're going to learn will use key points, stuff like that. And also, since they're channeling the key through their body and they're not actually using verbal components, your key can still be used while you're silenced. So that's pretty awesome. One of the first ways you'll be able to spend your key points is with the Flurry of Blows ability. This is an ability that costs a bonus action and a single key point, and will perform a unarmed attack that is equivalent to 2 normal unarmed attacks. So Flurry of Blows, like it's called, you're throwing out a bunch of punches, but it's actually 2 unarmed attacks. Any bonuses that you have to unarmed attacks will roll into Flurry of Blows. So with the right build, with the right gear, this thing can do a crazy amount of damage. You'll get to see some of that later on in this video, and the setup that I have is far from optimized. I was just using whatever monk gear I had from a playthrough without a monk in it, so I wasn't like collecting the gear. I just threw on a couple pieces that made sense, and you'll see the results here shortly. The first level monk will also be granted the Unarmored Defense passive, which will add your wisdom modifier to your armor class as long as you're not wearing any armor and you're not using a shield. That's going to keep coming back up. You also get the martial arts dexterous attacks passive. This essentially allows the monk to treat all weapons that qualify as monk weapons as though they were finesse weapons. So if you decide to build for a dexterity monk, your weapons will scale off dexterity. If you want to build a strength-based monk, which is absolutely possible, and some of the craziest builds I've seen were strength monks, it will scale the damage with your strength if your strength is higher. If your dexterity is higher, it'll scale with that one. So it's just nice versatility baked in. They can play either stat they want. Upon reaching second level, the monk will also receive another bundle of key spending abilities, and on top of that, you're going to get a passive 10 feet per turn movement speed increase as long as you're not wearing any armor or using a shield. I really can't stress this enough. If you're playing a monk and you're wearing armor or using a shield, you're not playing a monk. You're playing a character that runs in and punches somebody a few times and then gets killed because you don't have 80 to 90% of the passive buffs that your class is trying to give you because you're wearing the wrong gear. Take the armor off, lose the shield, and you are going to be drowning in passive bonuses from being a monk. Free your mind from those earthly burdens. The key spenders you're going to get at second level are Patient Defense, which costs a bonus action and a key point and grants you a buff that lasts for 1 turn. This buff causes all attack rolls against you to have disadvantage and grants you advantage on any dexterity saving throws. Basically, this is just an increase in the chance that any attack is going to miss you next turn. The last 2 key spenders are Step of the Wind Dash and Step of the Wind Disengage. The first allows you to spend a bonus action and a key point to double your movement speed for that turn and allows you to jump without spending a bonus action. So it's the effects of dash, plus you can also jump on top of it just by using a key point and a bonus action. So pretty strong. Any increase in mobility in this game, especially in combat, if you have increased mobility, that's a huge increase to both your survivability and your damage, because you can get into range, deal damage, and then get out of range, hide behind a corner, and get the safety if you have enough mobility. And then it is both an offensive and defensive increase just by having that extra mobility. The disengage version of Step of the Wind functions the same way, except it grants you the effects of disengage instead of dash. It still allows you to jump without using a bonus action afterwards. So this one is for if your character gets surrounded and you need to make an escape without getting a bunch of opportunity attacks against you. Use your bonus action disengage, jump right over those people, and run to safety. You will likely be using both of these skills throughout the entirety of your playthrough. These are both very, very good. Third level is a big one for the monk. You're going to get to choose your subclass at this level, but also you're going to get a couple of shared bonuses regardless of which subclass you end up picking. So let's go over those first, and then we'll talk about the subclasses for a second. The shared bonuses are another key point. You're going to earn these as you level up. These let you use your martial arts abilities and spells more times per day. These are great to have. Your martial arts Deft Strikes passive ability is going to get upgraded at third level from 1d4 to 1d6. So it's just added damage to everything you do that uses unarmed strikes, which is a lot of things. You also earn the super awesome Deflect Missiles ability. This will allow you to use your reaction to reduce the damage from a ranged attack. This can be a seriously huge amount of damage reduction to a single ranged attack. And then if the damage of the attack gets reduced all the way to 0, your monk is going to get the opportunity to spend a key point to grab the projectile out of the air and fling it back at the person who shot it at them. You get to pull the old Uno reverse card and send it back their way. Throughout your playthrough, the amount of damage mitigation this is going to grant you will be absolutely heroic. And depending on how you end up building your monk, you can kill people by redirecting these projectiles at them. I was using a strength-based tavern brawler throwing an unarmed strikes monk build, and when I redirected projectiles at people, they were hitting for like 50 to 60 damage. That is a ton of damage. Someone shoots you with an arrow and you fling it back at them like it's a freaking rail gun and just annihilate them with it. It's awesome. Now, earlier I mentioned that you're going to be choosing a subclass at third level as well, and that's true. The 3 subclasses that you have to choose from from are Way of the Four Elements, Way of the Open Hand, and Way of Shadow. Each one of these is going to lean towards a unique play style with a focus on a certain like monk training style or play style niche, and you're also going to get a bunch of bonuses that every monk gets. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to go through all the levels covering everything that all monks are going to get. And then after we do that, we'll come back and take a more in-depth look at each subclass individually and dive into what each one of those gives you. Let's get into it. At 4th level, you're going to gain another key point and your first feat. And as always, ability improvement is a very strong choice on your feat levels, as increasing your main stats ends up to a huge amount of gameplay bonuses throughout your playthrough, as well as, bonus damage, bonus armor scaling, stuff like that. But there's also a few feats worth mentioning for the monk. I mentioned earlier the Tavern Brawler feat allows for some pretty broken builds. You focus on strength and unarmed attacks and throwing things. Tavern Brawler adds your strength modifier in multiple times and causes those attacks to do tons of damage. So you can be like absolutely cracking skulls with a build like this. The Alert and Athlete feats are both also great for increased initiative and increased mobility. So neither one of those is ever going to be a bad thing to have. You also gain the Slow Fall passive bonus at 4th level, which will allow you to use a reaction to gain resistance to falling damage when your monk falls. So during the course of a playthrough, this might prevent a bit of damage, but I would say this is probably going to be mostly unnoticed by most people, because odds are if you're going to be jumping off somewhere that's high enough to cause you fall damage, you would probably plan for that, and you'd probably use either feather fall or something, teleport down. I don't know. Somebody right now down in the comments is probably like, oh no, my parkour monk build, taking reduced fall damage is imperative for my monk build. So anyway, if that's the case, that's awesome. Let me know how you built it. I'd love to talk to you about it. 5th level is huge for all of the martial classes. This is the level where melee classes, melee characters get extra attack. This lets you attack twice per action on each turn. So getting this one ability massively increases the damage potential of your characters and potentially doubles the effectiveness of certain abilities. Like I said, 5th level is huge. You also gain another key point and the Stunning Strike ability. This is a monk ability that's going to allow you to spend a key point and an action to strike your target with the potential to stun them. There are both armed and unarmed versions of this ability, so both of them function the same way. You'll just use whichever one makes sense for your character. If you're using weapons, use the weapon one. If you're using your bare hands, then use the unarmed one. At 6th level, you'll gain another key point. Your bonus movement per turn will increase from 10 feet to 15 feet. Extra mobility is always welcome. Like we've said before, we'll take every bit of mobility per turn that we can get. You're going to get the Key Empowered Strikes ability. This is an ability that is going to count your unarmed attacks as magical damage for the purpose of overcoming resistances. So if you're fighting a target that is either resistant or immune to non-magical bludgeoning damage, well, now your fists count as magical bludgeoning damage, so you may have just doubled the damage you're doing to that person just because your fists are overcoming that resistance or immunity. This is a big deal here. Each one of the subclasses also receives something at 6th level, but we're gonna come back to that later on, and we'll talk about all those later on. 7th level has some pretty awesome benefits for you. Firstly, you're going to get another key point, and next I'm going to go out of order for dramatic effect. The Stillness of Mind passive ability. If you are charmed or frightened, you automatically cast Stillness of Mind to remove the condition. This is permanent, passive, almost immunity to 2 crowd control effects. This is very powerful. And lastly, the dramatic ability that we skipped for this very moment, the evasion passive ability. Your agility lets you dodge out of the way of certain spells. When a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful dexterity saving throw, it deals no damage if you succeed and only half damage if you fail. What in the world does that mean? That sounds super confusing. So let's take a look at that. In order to look more closely at this ability, we're going to pull up the fireball spell, everybody's favorite, and this is going to help explain how attack rolls and saving throws are different. When you cast certain spells, you don't have to make an attack roll when you cast them. This effectively means that the spell is guaranteed to hit where you're casting it, and then enemies or creatures that are within that area get a chance to make a saving throw as though like they saw it coming. They saw the fireball flying into the room and they dove out of the way. That was their saving throw. Oh no! And they dove out of the way. Well, the fireball exploded and they were still in the radius of it, but they were diving out of the way. So they take half damage because they passed their saving throw. Yeah, they still got hurt in the blast, but it was only half. They still took some damage though. Well, evasion is essentially the monk being so fast that they're thinking 2 steps ahead of the rest of the people in the room. That fireball starts to be cast and the monk they were already moving. If they fail their saving throw, they take half damage like the other guy that was diving out because they were that far ahead. Them failing, worst case scenario, they only take half damage now. If they succeed their saving throw, they take no damage. Your monk is so fast that he can just dodge out of that fireball explosion now, take no damage, which is awesome. At 8th level, the monk is going to receive another key point and their second feat. Bump your main stats a little bit more if you want, or take a look at the feats. See if something sounds interesting for your character. If it sounds like it's good for your character, it probably is. 9th level is going to grant you a few things. You're going to get another key point. Your martial arts deft strikes passive is going to upgrade your unarmed strikes damage from the 1d6 that it currently is to 1d8 now. So now everything that uses your unarmed attacks as the base damage is using a 1d8 instead of the original 1d4 you started with. So we've moved up quite a bit in damage there. You will also get the advanced unarmored movement passive, which will make it so difficult terrain no longer slows you down and you can jump an additional 20 feet as long as you're not wearing armor or using a shield. There are also some subclass bonuses that we're going to come back and discuss here in a bit. 10th level is a really crazy, unique one, and it's the reason that I mentioned the green dragonborn monk and, you know, why you potentially would not want to roll a green dragonborn for your monk at the beginning of this video. Firstly, you're going to get your normal key point. Your bonus movement speed will increase from 15 feet per turn to 20 feet per turn. You guessed it, as long as you're not wearing any armor or using a shield. You get it? You're not allowed to wear armor or use a shield. Make sure you're not doing either one of those things on accident. Sometimes you can accidentally equip armor on people and it can disable a bunch of stuff. Make sure you're not wearing armor. Also, you're gonna gain the purity of body passive ability. What the heck is that? This makes the monk completely immune to poison damage, being poisoned, and being diseased. So from now on, your monk just doesn't take poison damage and can't be poisoned or catch diseases just for hitting 10th level. That's pretty busted. That's crazy good. 11th level is going to be a key point and a subclass ability, so we'll cover these in a second. And 12th level, finally, will be your final key point. So you're going to end up with a total of 13 and your third and final feat. That covers everything for the bonuses that every monk is going to get. Now we're going to go backwards in time to the monk's third level again. We're going to look at each subclass, starting with the Way of the Four Elements monk, and eventually we're going to find out what each one grants you, what the benefits and drawbacks of each one are. Let's go take a look at the Way of the Four Elements monk. You focus your ki to bend the elements to your will, using them as an extension of your own body. At 3rd level, the Four Elements monk receives the Harmony of Fire and Water ability. This allows the monk to spend action once per long rest in order to regain half of their ki points for that day. You can only use it outside of combat, but if you use it at an optimal time, it essentially gives you an additional 50% ki points for that day. So that's good. Pretty decent skill. I like it. I like the idea that it rewards really good, really attentive players, but it doesn't actually punish you if you don't use this. It's just a little bit of a boost if you pay attention to it, and if you don't, your gameplay experience is not going to be ruined. You will also be allowed to choose 3 subclass spells from a list of 11 options. The spells on this list are mostly slightly altered versions of spells that exist in the game already. However, there are a few unique spells on the list that are only available to Four Elements monks. Fangs of the Fire Snake is one such example. This will allow you to strike your enemy from a short distance away while infusing your attack with fire damage. You can then follow up with another hit for a bit more fire damage. Fist of Unbroken Air is another monk unique spell. This is a punch that utilizes the monk's ki to produce a ranged blast of air, causing bludgeoning damage to your target. This will send most enemies flying up to 20 feet and possibly knock them prone, leaving them vulnerable to follow-up attacks. Shaping of the Ice is a unique spell, which allows the monk to create an ice cube that can be climbed on. This is usable in combat to help with high ground advantage or positioning your team better, or you can use it in the open world for just straight up exploration, helping yourself climb up onto ledges you can't reach and stuff like that. I think the spell is cool, and the times where you're going to get use out of it are going to feel incredible, but I find it pretty hard to justify using this one over some of the other spells that are available on the list. I understand anybody that wants to take this and gets use out of it. I'm super happy for you. I just find it hard to take and use this one with so many other cool spells available. And finally, Water Whip is the last monk-only spell we're going to be covering for now. This is a mid-range spell which lashes out with a whip made of water, attempting to either grab the enemy and violently pull them towards you, or grab them and yank them off their feet, leaving them laying prone. When you go to cast it, it's going to ask you, which version do you want to cast? Do you want to cast the one that pulls somebody towards you, or you want to cast the one that yanks them off their feet and knocks them prone? You get to choose each time you cast it. Having access to one spell that can do various types of crowd control is always good. I like this a lot, and the other spell options on the list are all variations of other existing spells from the game. There's nothing wrong with any of them, and they range from Thunder Wave to Chromatic Orb in their functionality. You have a wide variety of elemental spells to choose from here. You can pick whatever will suit your character the best here, honestly. There is definitely a min-maxed set of specific best spells you're supposed to choose at this level, but I have no clue what it is because that's not how I have played this game. I think if you want to be able to wave your fists in the air and shoot a piercing shard of ice across the room into somebody's chest, I think you should go ahead and be able to do that, because I think that sounds cool enough to justify potentially doing a little bit less damage with your build. But I get it, some people want to min-max their builds. I'm not sure what the specific best spells to pick here are, but I'm 100% in favor of just going with what you like. None of the choices are bad here. 6th level is when the Four Elements monk is going to receive their next bonus. You're going to be allowed to choose one more spell to add to your spell bar, and this time the list you have to choose from is going to include the original spells that you saw the first time, plus 3 new spells. These are the monk's variations of Hold Person, which is a really good crowd control ability that you can use to take people out of the fight for multiple rounds. Scorching Ray, which is a multi-targetable beam of fire that you can shoot out, where you shoot out pew 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 different beams of fire at different targets, or shoot them all 3 at one person, whatever you want to do. And then Shatter, which is a thunder damage explosion where you pick an area and it blast thunder damage there. So once again, you have a ton of great spell options. Look through them, pick out what you want for your character. All these spells are good for certain situations, so whatever you need covered, go ahead and pick those spells. At 9th level, the Way of the Four Elements monk is going to gain a new passive ability, Improved Elemental Casting. This is going to add damage to a bunch of the monk spells that are on that list that you've been choosing from. Your Hold Person spell is going to be able to hold an additional target now. Scorching Ray will be able to fire an additional fire beam. All in all, this level is going to be a big damage improvement to a ton of the spells that you've already picked, so this is going to be a good one. You also are going to be allowed to choose another spell from the spell list at this level. Next up, 11th level will grant the monk one last spell from the monk's spell list, except this time 3 more new spells are going to be on the list. These ones are crazy. Flames of the Phoenix, which is the monk's version of Fireball, and I mean, who doesn't love slinging a fireball? Then you're going to get Mist Stance, which is a monk only version of the gaseous form spell that will only transform yourself, won't transform your party like gaseous form does. Transforms you into a little tiny ball of gas. You can sneak through pipes into people's houses and stuff like that. So you're not going to be able to take your whole party through the pipe opening you found as a monk, but maybe you can get through there yourself and find some way to open the door and let your party in, something like that. And your final choice of the 3 new spells is Ride the Wind. This one is a self buff that requires concentration and allows your monk to fly until they long rest or lose concentration. This ability is really strong for both combat and exploration, but it might be less useful to you depending on what story choices you end up making. I'm not going to go into any spoilers, but just know that this skill is going to be disappointing to some of you. All in all, to sum up the Way of the Four Elements monk, you are the avatar. You get the same ridiculous storm of unarmed blows that every monk gets, and you also get a pile of elemental spells that you can use to help control the battlefield and cause havoc amongst the ranks of your enemies. This is a great subclass, and I think anybody could fit this into their party effectively. That's it for the Avatar Monk. Now we're going to rewind back to 3rd level again and go down the Way of the Open Hand. You specialize in unarmed combat, using your hands and control of ki to heal or inflict grievous hurt. Just for choosing the Open Hand subclass, you'll receive 3 variations of the Flurry of Blows ability. One that can potentially knock targets prone, one that can stagger the target, which prevents them from using reactions, and the third, which has the ability to potentially knock your target back up to 17 feet. These are all very nice to have. It functions the same way as Flurry of Blows, except with these added bonuses. You're going to use these a ton. At 6th level, the Open Hand Monk is going to receive a fantastic ability. Wholeness of Body is an action you can use once per long rest. The ability will instantly heal you for a respectable amount of health, grant you half of your ki points back, and then every turn for 3 turns, it's going to grant you another ki point and a bonus action. And coincidentally, 1 ki point and a bonus action is the ingredients for a knuckle sandwich. So you're going to be passing these out left and right while this buff counts down. You'll also earn 3 manifestation abilities. These are the Manifestation of Body, Manifestation of Mind, and Manifestation of Soul. Each one of these functions the same way. They're all toggleable abilities. You can only have one of them active at a time, and each one of them adds a little bit of magical damage to your unarmed strikes of a different type for each buff. So if you activate Manifestation of Body, you're going to get necrotic damage added to your unarmed strikes. Manifestation of Mind adds psychic damage, and Soul adds radiant damage. Being able to toggle on-demand magical damage of different types is very, very useful. There's going to be definite situations where having a little bit of radiant damage might make your life a lot easier. So anyway, this will be great to have. The next bonus for the Open Hand Monk will be at 9th level. You'll receive some very unique abilities this time. The first two are strikes that will cause your target's ki to resonate with your own for 10 turns. During that time, if you trigger the ki resonation blast ability, you will detonate the resonant ki in each target you have struck with the other two abilities. The other two strikes are the same. They function the same way, except that one of them is an action, the other one's a bonus action, so you can spread multiple of them per turn by using both. Can't stack multiple stacks of this on one target, so basically you're trying to get as many people resonating with your ki as possible in that 10 turn limit. The final bonus the Open Hand Monk will get is at 11th level. Tranquility is a passive ability that will cause the monk to gain the effects of Sanctuary after any long rests that you take from this point forward. So when your monk wakes up from long rest, they're under the effects of Sanctuary, which means that they can't be specifically targeted with an attack. They can still be hit by an explosion from somebody else near them being targeted or something like that, but they can't specifically be targeted. And what makes it immediately go away is if your monk performs any kind of hostile action against somebody else. It's game on. They can be targeted by everybody. Still fantastic ability to have. So my final thoughts on the Way of the Open Hand Monk. This one is absolutely ridiculous. It's definitely, of the three subclasses, it's the most straightforward one. You're making a character whose fists do the talking. Absolutely. You're going to be hitting multiple unarmed attacks per turn that will deal more damage than some of the strongest weapons in the game. Your fists are going to be just tearing people to shreds. This is the ultimate form of martial arts training. Your monk's body is a lethal weapon, and they infuse their strikes with magical ki and plant explosive ki in the bodies of their foes. You're going to be putting out ridiculous damage numbers with quite a few crowd control options built in as well. I highly, highly recommend this monk for any party as well. So far, monks 2 for 2 on recommendations. If you want to use either of the two monks we've talked about in your party, 100% agree. So now for the third and final time, let's rewind back to 3rd level and let's see if I recommend the third monk subclass as well. The Way of Shadow. You value the arts of stealth and subterfuge, bending the shadows to your will to strike without warning. Upon first choosing the Way of Shadow subclass, you will be granted a ton of new abilities. These are Shadow Arts, Hide, which will allow you to hide for the cost of a bonus action, and then you're going to gain 4 Shadow Arts spells: the Pass Without Trace, Darkness, Dark Vision, and Silence spells. Each one of these allows the monk to cast the respective spell for the cost of an action and 2 key points. These are all excellent spells for sneaking around both inside and out of combat. You can use these in open world exploration. Do not underestimate Darkness when you desperately need to steal something right out from underneath somebody's face, because you can just throw down a cloud of darkness, steal it right in front of them, and escape before they ever know what happened. You also are going to get the Minor Illusion cantrip, which is another tool for a sneaky character. Hit them with the Kansas City Shuffle. You make them look right and you go left. All of that stuff right there was just for picking the Way of Shadow. That's ridiculous. Next up, we're going to be going to 5th level. On top of receiving the normal key point, an extra attack passive ability that every monk gets at this level, the Way of Shadow monk is also going to gain access to Cloak of Shadows. This is an action that allows the monk to become invisible if they are currently obscured. The invisibility will last for 10 turns or until the monk attacks, casts another spell, takes an action, takes any damage, or steps out into a brightly lit area. So as long as you keep to the shadows, then you'll stay invisible. Being invisible will grant the monk advantage on their attack rolls and grants enemy attack rolls disadvantage against them. So as you can tell, they were very serious about the shadow portion of the name for the subclass. At 6th level, the shadow monk will get the shadow step ability. This will allow the monk to teleport from one shadow to another within a 60-foot range. This is pretty much exactly as awesome as it sounds. If you can imagine having access to Misty Step pretty much at all times, as long as there's some shadows in the room, which let's be honest, there are. So you get a ton of mobility out of this skill. That's already awesome enough. On top of all of that, Shadow Step also grants the monk advantage on their next melee attack roll. Not only do you get this like unlimited mobility skill, but also when you do use it, it grants you advantage on your next attack roll. Why not? The final bonus that the Way of Shadow Monk is going to receive is at 11th level. This one is Shadow Strike. This is another one of the abilities that comes in both the weapon and unarmed variations, so you'll use whichever one of them makes sense for your character. If you're using a weapon, you'll use the weapon one. If you're not, you will use the unarmed one. The ability allows the monk to teleport 30 feet, and it deals a weapon strike with added psychic damage. It costs an action and 3 key points, and it can do a pretty significant amount of damage, with the added benefit of also being a 30-foot mobility skill on top of it. All right, so here's the finale. What are my final thoughts on the Shadow Monk? I think it's awesome. I think Galarian absolutely killed monk design in this game. I think all 3 subclasses are awesome for different reasons. I think any party has room for a monk of some kind in it, and I think it feels incredible to be dealing the amount of unarmed damage that you can do by properly gearing a monk. And I think being able to teleport from shadow to shadow, assassinating targets with lethal psychic stabs is pretty awesome. Also, as an added little bit of somewhat lore tidbit, without going too far into spoilers, Astarion can work very well as a Way of Shadow monk. If you don't want to play him as the rogue that he started as, you can absolutely respec him to Way of Shadow and it would fit his character very, very well. You can still have him be the sneaky thief character in your party and everything. Way of Shadow monk works great for that because it's a freaking literal ninja, okay? You want to play a ninja? This is the guy right here. So I've got nothing negative to say about any of that. That's pretty much it, travelers. We've covered the monk class abilities and took an in-depth look into each one of its subclasses. We've ranged from being the mighty avatar with the Way of the Four Elements monk, or absolutely obliterating foes with unarmed strikes as an open hand monk, and finally the unseen assassins of the Way of Shadow. Which of the 3 subclasses sounds the most interesting to you? Which one are you planning on using in your next run? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there, if you've enjoyed yourself or if you've learned anything, why not leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and then when I release more content like this, you'll be able to come here and watch it. If you want to support the channel even further, check out my Patreon, which I'm going to link in the video description below. Either way, I appreciate all the support you guys have shown the channel. It's been really awesome to see all the feedback. Travelers, I'm glad you got to see me. Do your best to stay alive. Until next time, see ya.